Welcome to another episode of the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast about the environment in Canada by Sierra Club Canada. I'm Jessica Murray, Sierra Club Canada's Line 5 community organizer, and I'm part of a cross-border effort to protect our Great Lakes from a devastating oil spill. To learn more about Line 5, follow us at Sierra Club Ontario on Instagram and join the movement to safeguard the largest freshwater source on our planet. You can also connect with me every other week on Zoom, where I co-host a 1-hour community of practice following the work of Joanna Macy, known as The Work That Reconnects. Feel free to check out the episode with Sally Ludwig and The Work That Reconnects and email ontario@sierraclub.ca for more information. Today, I'm speaking with Drew Tozer, who is an NRCan energy advisor and through Foundry Heat Pumps takes on walking everyday homeowners through full electrification of their homes. Today, Drew shares common misconceptions about heat pumps, and I share some pitfalls through my own journey to electrification. You'll also learn more about how you can get a free copy of Drew's book, Feel Good Homes: How to Choose the Right Heat Pump for Comfortable, Safety, Sustainable Home. Before we begin, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on our homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM, bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick, on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daytime. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe so you get the latest episodes from us. Hi, good morning, Drew. How are you doing today?
Hi, Jessica. I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's so nice to be able to connect with you again. The first time we spoke, actually, I was at the very, very beginning of my heat pump journey, and you were one of the people that was recommended to me by Energy Neighbors, the other way around. But yeah, connected to Energy Neighbors, and really, I felt like I was in the Wild West of figuring out how to do what I can for my own home and the space that I actually physically inhabit. So yeah, it's really great to connect with you again and catch up at this point. There's lots of really exciting information that I want folks to know, and I'm sure you do as well. So maybe I'll give you a chance to just introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, so my name is Drew Tozer. I run the front end of an HVAC company in Toronto called Foundry Heat Pumps. I'm also the author of a book called Feel Good Homes. And by trade, I'm an energy advisor. So I really got my experience in houses, testing houses, doing blower door tests, doing the energy modeling, and then kind of walking homeowners through the entire process of electrification. And so the reason I wrote the book is because every time I meet with a homeowner, that was kind of a 2-hour process. And I was finding that much of that was the same conversation, the same arc, and it's similar to kind of the arc that you went through on your project for your house. And so the book is just kind of the compilation of all of those explanations and stories and analogies and tips and tricks to help homeowners through that process. You can think of it as kind of a 2-hour expert consultation, except you can do it on your own time, at your own pace, and it's free. So that's it.
And it sounds great because I'm not sure we are at this point with the different rebates that are available, at least for where I am, because I'm situated in Guelph, Ontario. There was a rebate available through the city, and then I think there was a rebate also available through the federal government, and then also one maybe even through Enbridge. So, I mean, that kind of speaks to even having done it and gone through it and now being off of gas completely in the house. I'm still kind of like, what did I do?
Yeah, I feel like our conversations have spanned your entire journey through electrification and heat pumps.
Yeah. And I think I want to just like offer our listeners some empathy that It seems like something that should be really simple, but I've found has been really, really complicated and in some ways even dangerous. Like not in like a physically dangerous kind of way, but more so, once I started looking into it, and of course I was targeted with ads, there was a lot of, how do I say it? I guess I would be approached by different companies that I got like funny feelings about. And then there
Yeah.
were quite a few where it was like, oh, this is actually not what you want. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to any of these kind of like expected hurdles or expected kind of like challenges and obstacles. It's so funny. It's like this journey to electrification, but it includes all these like unexpected hurdles in the form of, I don't know, like
Yeah,
shade.
misconceptions. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of businesses that are doing what works for them, what's best for them, and not necessarily what's best for you. You're kind of hoping that it happens to be what's best for you too. So that's actually how I got into this, was trying to solve that same problem for my house. And I kind of fell in love with building science and how buildings work and how heat pumps work. And that happened because it's a difficult journey and it's complicated and it's tough to know where to start. Like I live in a 100-year-old house and I always knew that I wanted to electrify it, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't want to start down that process and somehow ruin this century home.
Mm,
And so after going through that and learning it myself and running into contractors that would repeat the misconceptions about heat pumps, and they tell you that it doesn't work in cold weather and you
mm,
need to have a gas backup, or just doing anything to really redirect you back to those options because that's what they're used to selling for their entire careers. That's what inspired me first to become an energy advisor to help homeowners in that process. And then that contractor side was specifically how I ended up in the HVAC space, because I was really tired of being an energy advisor and kind of making these roadmaps for homeowners and then saying, okay, good luck. Like, I hope that the contractor you talk to agrees with everything that I just said. And if they don't, then the homeowner is really stuck in between two experts that are telling them the opposite things. And more often than not, they're going to go with the contractor's opinion because that's who's going to be actually doing the work. So, yeah, I think that's the big thing to watch out for. Like when homeowners ask me about advice for finding a good and bad contractor, or heat pumps specifically, whether the contractor is doing that, whether they are redirecting you back to gas furnaces because that's what they're used to,
mhm,
or whether they are taking your questions and concerns seriously and whether they're trying to find the right solution for you. And we can go into it a bit later. The other kind of tip and trick for homeowners is find a contractor that cares about heat load calculations. And that kind of goes into whether they have your best interest in mind or not.
Yeah. So as we kind of continue on our conversation, I'm realizing maybe we've skipped a step, and let's like actually take a couple steps back. So what is a heat pump?
Okay.
Why do we need them? Do we have to keep our furnaces? Maybe let's just start there.
Okay. Yeah. So let's start even one further step back. Let's start with what everybody is familiar with, which is an air conditioner.
Mhm,
And so when your house gets hot in the summer, an air conditioner doesn't add cooling to the house. What it's doing is taking some of that heat in the house and pushing it outside, pumping it outside. In the same way that if you have a room and there's too much light in it, you don't make it dark by adding darkness, you make it dark by removing the light. And so air conditioners just move heat from inside to outside. A heat pump is the exact same technology, it's the exact same system. It just has a few extra parts that allow it to switch directions. So, to switch the directions of the flow of that heat. So, rather than taking the heat from inside and putting it outside, a heat pump is able to take the heat from the outside air and bring it inside to warm the houses. So, cold climate heat pumps work down below negative 30 Celsius. And whether that's cold enough is really a question of your local climate. In Toronto, we haven't hit negative 30 Celsius since 1994. And even then, it was for a few minutes overnight on a cold January morning.
mhm,
And so it's certainly a different conversation if we're talking about that in Toronto versus Edmonton or Northern Ontario or other areas like that. So no, heat pumps don't need a gas furnace backup or any sort of combustion furnace backup. They are able to do that by themselves, unless you're in one of those much colder climates. And then, sure, a heat pump can be installed with a furnace, and then you get both those systems. Like, I think Edmonton hit like negative 45 or something last winter or 2 winters ago. And it's like, yeah, at that point, it can be helpful to have both the systems. But certainly for Toronto, and similar climates to that, there's no requirement. And I think that it's really overkill to have a gas furnace in Toronto where you just don't need it. Like, heat pumps are perfect for this.
Yeah, I think I want to kind of drill down on that specific point, actually. I can't remember who it was I was speaking to. I was speaking to someone that actually referred me to you, and they had worked for environmental defense for some time and some other kind of like environmental nonprofit
Oh,
spaces.
is it Adam
Yeah,
Scott?
Adam, there
Yeah.
we go. Thank you. So Adam was sharing with me that he really believed that this Enbridge rebate was kind of a way to convince people, like, hey, like we're doing you a service, like here's a rebate, but we're only going to give you enough to get the heat pump that can't handle all of those lower temperatures. And then we're going to tell people that, oh, but you still need your furnace. And so it's kind of like co-opting the technology and then planting a mistruth in there so that people actually are still reliant on gas and therefore the hookup for Enbridge in every single house still exists. Because even if you don't use gas in a month, there's still that like hookup
The
cost of
meter fee. Yeah. Yeah.
$40, right? So I wanted to kind of like put that out there and see what you think about that.
Yeah. The rebate programs, I mean, that was several rebate programs ago, and it continues to change. The rebate programs, to be eligible for those, there's an eligible product list. Like, you need to pick a heat pump that is approved by NRCan. And all of those are cold climate heat pumps. So all of those are able to do what I was talking about, which is work down cold enough, certainly for Toronto. I mean, I disagree with one part of that, which is that I don't think that Enbridge was encouraging kind of standard, traditional, the old style of heat pumps that couldn't do cold climate. But I do think that Enbridge's only incentive to do this is to control the messaging around heat pumps. And they also get to be the good guy that sends out the rebate checks to homeowners. And you're right that they are a gas utility, and that's kind of what happens when you let the gas utility be in charge of electrification rebate programs, is that of course they aren't going to try to convince homeowners to go fully electric and fully educate them that that's even a possibility.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Enbridge is a huge company. So it's a gas utility. I think for the everyday consumer, everyday person, like when we think Enbridge, we probably think of like, oh, my furnace, warm,
Mm-hmm.
nice. But I guess it's also just good to know that Enbridge also owns pipelines, so it's also the physical infrastructure that gets all sorts of material from the tar sands over into these parts
Yeah.
of.
And I think that they are also expanding into the kind of contractor space with their not really arm's length Enbridge Sustain. Like, they are also working on the let's start installing equipment
Hey,
side of
interesting. I didn't
things.
know that. What are they
Yeah.
installing?
Well, so Enbridge Sustain does, I think it's more on the ground source heat pump side, but I wouldn't be surprised if they started doing more air source heat pump operate, like rent to own, all of that stuff. Like, basically operate similar to a Reliance or an Enercan, because they're that kind of that scale anyway.
I mean, I have very mixed feelings about rent to own, like water heaters and
Yeah, yeah. I think rent to own is a bit better than just straight rentals, which is a lot of what Enercan and Reliance do. I always tell homeowners that, especially on the water heater side, that it's basically never worth it to do that versus any other finance program and just own the equipment that you're installing in your house. But
Mhm.
for some people, they like the peace of mind, I guess, of never having a surprise cost for that. But you're just spreading that cost out over time and buying the equivalent of like 3 water heaters over the life of your one water heater. But
Right.
you get peace of mind for it.
Yeah, that's true. I also wanted to go back to something you said about explaining the technology of heat pumps. So first of all, just to clarify, like heat pumps, it's called a heat pump, but it also, from what I understand, it's actually a better source for cold air than it is for actually heat. Is that correct?
So the other way that heat pumps are explained is just thinking of it as a two-way AC, a two-way air conditioner. So
Okay.
traditional air conditioners are just one-way air conditioners. They can only take heat
Cold
out
in.
of the house and put
Yeah.
it outside. So a
Yeah.
heat pump is two-way. So it's not necessarily better in the summer. It will be the same as any new high efficiency air conditioner. So it's better if you're replacing your 15-year-old air conditioner. Certainly it's going to be higher efficiency than that, but it's going to be on par with any other good new equipment that you install.
hmm Maybe they should have called it something else other than a heat pump because it just sounds like a heat source when you call it a heat pump.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of an ongoing debate about that. Like, I actually think that I like the term heat pump, and I don't think there's really any benefit to changing it unless somebody comes up with a good enough name. I could be swayed on that. So, think of your house as a bucket of water, and there's a hole in it, so it's slowly losing water, right? Your house works the same way with heat. Your house has some amount of heat, and it's slowly losing it. The only way to keep that bucket of water at that consistent level is to keep adding heat at the same amount that is leaking out through the hole.
Mhm.
And that's the same for a house where we need to add heat at the same rate that the house is losing it to keep it at a constant temperature. So water goes from high to low, heat goes from hot to cold. The only way to get water up a hill is to pump it up the hill, right? To get it from low to high. The only way to get heat to go from cold to hot is to pump it through the equivalent of pumping it up the hill. So in that way, I like the kind of terminology of a heat pump because it really is pumping heat against the direction that it wants to flow, which is from the warm house to the outside cold in the winter. And we
Okay.
are pumping that heat back into the house.
Gotcha. Okay, that does make sense because it's not like it's pumping cold, it's pumping heat.
It's just all we can do is pump heat because heat is just energy. We're just moving that energy from one place to another.
Gotcha. Okay, I think I got that. That makes sense. You've convinced me that the term heat pump.
Yeah, for now, like I'm happy to brainstorm other ideas. And if somebody comes up with a brilliant one and can convince the entire industry to change off of heat pumps, I'll follow that. Yeah.
Necessary. Let's not take our time to focus on that with our
Yeah.
time here. Okay, tell me about other misconceptions around heat pumps that you think just an average homeowner should know about.
Yeah. So the one we talked about is whether they need a gas furnace
hmm
as a backup. The answer is no, they don't need one. In some cases, it's helpful to have one, but heat pumps can work on their own. Another common question from homeowners is how do we get heat from cold air? Because we stand around in negative 15 Celsius winters and all we can think about is how cold it is. And we picture that cold air as having no energy. But in reality, cold winter air only has about 10 or 15% less energy than hot summer air. Like
Oh,
negative 15 versus positive 25, it's about a 15% energy difference between those two. And all heat pumps care about is how much energy there is. We just think about it as cold because that's just kind of the very small temperature range where humans feel hot and cold.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big one. There's plenty of energy in cold air. Other concerns, the grid is a big one. Everyone's concerned
Yeah.
about the electrical grid and what happens if everybody does this at the same time and the grid's going to fail.
We're all gonna
We're
freeze.
all going to freeze. So, a few things for that. If there's a power outage and you don't have a generator, your gas furnace doesn't work either. So, a gas furnace in a power outage provides just as much heat as a heat pump in a power outage. In terms of kind of the grid and long-term planning and all of that, it's important to remember that there's not currently a problem with the grid. There's not currently a constraint on the grid for this stuff. If we succeed with electrification movement and we kind of electrify faster than the grid can expand. So that would be a good problem to have.
Mhm.
The other parts about the grid is that every grid, every region has some sort of group that is responsible for operating the grid. And in Ontario, it's the IESO, the Independent Electricity System Operator. And within those grid operators, there are specific teams whose entire job is doing this type of long-term planning and taking all this into account and making sure that the grid stays reliable over time. So that's just to say somebody is thinking about this, and it's somebody's job to make sure that it works.
Mhm.
From the other pieces, from 1970 to 1980 or 85, we doubled the grid capacity in Ontario, and we just haven't had to really increase it since then because kind of population growth and how much energy we're using has just kind of matched energy efficiency improvement. So it's been pretty flat. And then the last piece would be we live in a time right now with access to the cheapest source of electricity in human history, which is just solar. And so we have access, we have the resources to create more flexible, distributed, cheap electricity. And it's more of a political choice not to use that than it is a technical constraint. So combine all those together, I would say if you're worried about the grid, it's not a problem right now. Somebody's whole job is to worry about it. We've expanded the grid before, and we have the resources and the tools to do it again if we choose to.
I think that's really helpful to lay out. I think the one thing that really stuck out when you were speaking was that it's not that we can't do it, it's more about the political will. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, really good to know because sometimes it gets kind of murky. Like the political messaging can also include some misleading ideas. So I think that's really
Yeah.
helpful.
And especially on the solar side, the price of solar has dropped so much, so drastically, so quickly over the last decade that it's easy to remember a time from a decade ago when solar was expensive.
Mm,
And if that was the only time that you kind of ran into it or thought about it or heard about the price of solar, you're probably stuck with that as kind of a truth in your mind that solar is expensive, but it's dropped some 90, 95, 99%. Like every year it keeps just following this curve of getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so that's something that I would just try to get people to kind of update that idea in their mind that that's an expensive resource. It is the cheapest source of electricity ever.
even in comparison to wind.
Even in comparison to wind, yeah, solar is winning for that. And solar is also easier to do at a smaller scale. Like
Mhm.
homeowners, if they go through this and if they electrify their homes, many of them have the option to install solar either on their roof or on their property. That's tougher to do with wind. And more importantly, that's impossible to do if you stick with a gas furnace. Like you can generate electricity on your property, you can't extract and refine oil for your oil furnace in your basement.
Right. No, these are really good points. I want to shift gears to kind of like a very bottom line way of thinking, because I know that when I started on this journey, because of my work with Sierra Club Canada, like I felt very like to be in alignment with what I'm doing for work, like I really want to get off gas. You can't be a
Yep.
pipeline activist and be like, ah, gas, right? So
Yeah.
that was something that I was really, really vying for. And then at the same time, my wonderful partner was like, well, like, is it going to cost us more? And so there was a lot of Excel spreadsheets. But in the end, and to be honest, we moved into the house that we're in. We're also in a Century home. And we moved into the house before we'd actually experienced a winter here. So we'll
Mhm.
never be able to get that like apples to apples comparison. And I'm okay with that. But in my calculations and projections based on like a few different sources, it looked like it would be the same cost. So that was including the fact that that I did in the end get a 0% loan from the city of Guelph, which meant that the total amount of work that I had to do, it was shuffled into payments for the next 20 years. And so including that and then including our projected costs for electricity and removing the furnace and gas, to us, it looked like just about the same. So I'm curious to know, like, do you think that's kind of an acceptable benchmark, or we could have been wrong? We won't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you had enough Excel spreadsheets and you put enough numbers in there, I'm sure all the little errors just evened out. It is close. It depends. I want to kind of add the caveat that operating costs are a local issue. We are talking about across Canada, and this is a conversation across North America and across the world about electrification, how much these cost. So I don't want to say they are cheaper or more expensive because that depends on the province, on the state that you are in. And it also will change over time.
Mm,
We are talking about installing equipment that should last for 15 to 20 years.
mm,
And whether it ends up being cheaper or more expensive depends on future energy costs, the future cost of electricity and the future cost of gas over that time. And I certainly don't know that. I don't think anybody has any good way of predicting those energy costs over the next 15 years. So, yeah, we can look at kind of the current cost of those things. In Ontario, it's close. It got a bit less close with the carbon tax getting canceled because that kind of tips everything back towards cheap gas when you kind of lose those externalities. But yeah, in Ontario, we generally see, especially if you can fully electrify the house and get off Enbridge entirely and cancel that meter fee and save that money, then it ends up being close. And you get the other kind of comfort, health, safety, sustainability benefits of a heat pump for a similar operating cost of gas. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that not everybody is heating gas. Like, that's not everybody's base case. There are plenty of people in Ontario that are propane or oil or resistance electric baseboards. And for those ones, you certainly save money by switching to a heat pump when we're talking about switching to those ones. So worst case scenario is switching from gas to a heat pump in terms of the economics, and the best is going to be oil or some other like kerosene. There's a lot of like that happens, like especially on the East Coast. That's a real fuel oil that people burn for heating. So I wish I had one simple answer that it is cheaper or more expensive, but it depends on a whole bunch of factors that will change based on where you are and change over the life of the equipment.
hmm Yeah, no, that's entirely fair. And I appreciate your honesty. And it's always the expert advice is, it
It
depends.
depends. Yeah, it is the answer, especially in building science. If you ask any question, it
Uh-huh.
depends. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's something that I feel like is maybe a little bit less it dependsy. So you said something along the lines of benefits of health and sustainability. I don't know if everybody knows about why heat pumps are healthier. So maybe just like, yeah, share that with us.
Sure. Yeah. So in my book, the tagline on the front is how to choose the right heat pump for a comfortable, healthy, sustainable home.
Mhm.
And so if we want to kind of double click on that healthy option, I include health and safety kind of both in that same bucket. A big part of that is that the way that a gas furnace or propane or oil, any combustion furnace works is that it is kind of pumping that fuel into a heat exchanger, lighting it on fire, and then blowing a fan over it to push that heat throughout the house. So you have combustion in the house. And the reason that all of the gas furnaces, all those combustion furnaces have exhaust is because it's poisonous. Like, it's pollutants in the house, in your basement. And so heat pumps have no combustion. So there's none of the exhaust, there's none of those pollutants that come from the actual heat source. So if you fully electrify your house and if you don't have an attached garage and if you don't have a fireplace, you don't need a carbon monoxide detector in the house. Like, the
Oh,
reason that a carbon monoxide detector is important is because if your furnace or gas water heater starts to leak, it can leak carbon monoxide into the house and then poison everybody. If you
gotcha.
just have a fully electric house with just a heat pump and an electric water heater, there's no possible source of carbon monoxide in the house to do that. So that's part of the health and safety piece. The other part is like gas leaks and explosions do happen, probably less than we think because every time it happens, like a plane crash, it's like in the news. But a heat pump, again, doesn't have that fuel. There's no chance of a gas leak if you have a fully electric heat pump instead of a gas furnace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the big part of health and safety. The other piece is when we're talking about indoor air quality, a big part of that is how often the system is running and what type of filtration or ventilation you have in that as part of the HVAC system. And it is common for old gas furnaces to just have basically a dust catcher as the filter. Like it's just there to catch dust before it goes into the fan, like it's protecting the equipment. And if you have a right sized heat pump, it's easier to install kind of a big, kind of thick filter on that system. And because it's a right sized HVAC, it will run more often and continue to move that air through the house. And the more air that gets moved through the house, the more air goes through the filter. And so if you start thinking about your HVAC as a whole system and trying to solve all these problems, you end up with what I would describe as kind of a healthier HVAC system.
Hmm. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. That also made me think about, because like before we fully electrified the house, there was also like the gas stove. And I don't remember how many years ago, but there was this like idea that gas stoves were healthier. And then I remember after I had my kids, just like discovering like, oh, it's like linked to asthma. You're
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah. Which makes sense. Like during power outages, we are told not to bring barbecues or anything into the house. And like you're not supposed to bring a camp stove into the house and burn it to make food in a power outage because it's not safe, because it's combustion. And gas stoves are the exact same thing. If you have a gas stove, at the very least, you should have a good kitchen exhaust, like a good kitchen hood, and use it every single time you cook because it is linked to higher incidence of asthma in kids. And gas stoves have also been found to leak methane even when they're off. So they're kind of constantly leaking some amount of gas into the house. The other part, like the health and safety part of gas stoves that I appreciate as someone with a 1.5-year-old and a 5.5-year-old kid, is the safety side of induction, where if you take the pan off, if there's no magnetic pan on the stove, it just turns itself off. And the surface itself is almost cool to the touch whenever you're done. And so it's much safer to have kids in a kitchen around a stove when it's an induction cooktop instead of an open flame
Mm-hmm.
gas burning there.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair. So we have just a few minutes left. I want to take a moment for you to share more about your book. I think I saw that you're giving away free copies. So if folks want to learn more, if they want a copy of your book, if they want to talk to you, like let's go through like how to do that.
Yeah, so the book Feel Good Homes, like I said, its whole purpose is to be easy and quick to read. It's like I came to your house and had a 2-hour conversation with you and had a PowerPoint and walked you through everything, except that you can do it on your own time at your own speed. And so it's a guide so that you can think about the problems that exist in your house, comfort, health, and safety problems, understand the kind of underlying cause behind those problems, and then find solutions within your budget to solve those, and then some tips and tricks for finding good contractors in your area. I do run an HVAC company, so if you are in my area, I can help. The electrification movement is so big that I couldn't possibly electrify all the homes in Toronto, even if I personally wanted to. Like, it's not realistic. So I'm always happy to help, but I'm certainly not trying to hoard all
Monopoly.
the work for I'm going to be a monopoly on electrification. So I am giving away the book for free. If you go to my website, foundryheatpumps.ca, there's a button there. You can click it. If you're in Ontario, I will send you a hard copy. I will mail you a hard copy of the book for free. And if you're anywhere else, then you get a free PDF of the book. And if you're in one of those other areas and you want a hard copy, it's on Amazon, on all of the different Amazons in the world. It's also listed with the major book distributors, so you can go to your local bookstore and they can order it for you as well.
Perfect. Why did you choose the name Foundry?
I mean, a few reasons. One is the business reason of the HVAC contractor that I loved working with, that I partnered with, was already running an HVAC company called Foundry Mechanical.
Okay.
The pragmatic reason is that was part of my partnership pitch with him, was essentially keeping the same name so that all of this was kind of zero risk to him and his existing business. And Foundry for him was all about kind of custom work and doing a great job with that metalworking. I think people have a picture of kind of blacksmithing for that and that type of work, and he does a lot of hydronics as well. Foundries, the more that I've been thinking about it, nobody's asked me that question before, and I've been thinking about it more and more. And foundries actually have a big sustainability angle to them, because a foundry is where you take old metal things and you melt them, and then you pour that kind of liquid metal into molds and be able to reuse them. So foundries are actually kind of the biggest source of kind of recycling within the metal manufacturing world. You can imagine if we didn't have foundries, all of that metal would just go in a dump somewhere. So that's the pragmatic, real reason. And then if you want my environmental pitch, foundries are very environmentally friendly.
I will take both. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Drew. I see we've got about a minute. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share all of your wealth of expertise and your book with us. And yeah, for folks that are kind of on that cusp, here's your sign.
Yeah, this is the easy first step for you to start down this path.
All right. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica.
Just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on our homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM, bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick, on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daytime. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe so you get the latest episodes from us.